This podcast was sponsored by and recorded at Crossings Pub and Eatery on Hyde Park.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be finding us on the World Wide Web. We welcome you to another edition of the Vicar's Crossing Pubcast, or podcast from the pub. Pubcast is where I was going with that. We could change it to Pubcast. Podcast at the pub at Crossings here on Hyde Park Road in London. And my name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the rector and priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Memorial Anglican Church in London on the corner of Southdale and Wellington Road. And I'm here once again with Kevin.
How are you getting on?
I'm getting on.
Good. I'm Kevin George. I'm the priest and rector of St. Aidan's Anglican Church in the northwest corner of London, and glad to be here today to talk about some faith in the public square.
We're back, baby.
We're back.
We had a little bit of a hiatus.
Brief hiatus.
But that's okay. We're back at it again at Crossings. Good. And we got a great guest today. We've got some great stuff to chat about. So, Kevin, would you please introduce our guest?
Yeah, we're really thrilled, actually. I personally am quite thrilled because we are able to welcome into our midst our neighbor in ministry over at St. Aidan's, Dave Exley. Dave is the pastor at Riverside United. Just a little bit about Dave. He spent over 2 decades working in congregational ministry with the United Church of Canada, the Presbyterian Church. Sadly, nothing here about the Anglican Church. However, he is an ordained minister with the United Church of Canada, and he serves as the lead minister over there at Riverside. Dave lives in West London with his partner Betsy and their 2 daughters, and we get to see them on Christmas Day.
You do?
They don't have church on Christmas Day,
Oh, okay.
so they come and hang out with us on Christmas Day.
You know, I do a Christmas Day service, too.
Yeah. Well,
Just
that's
saying.
a long way across town, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
Dave, welcome to you.
Great to be here. Well, I should have added in there that maybe 2/3 of my education is in an Anglican institution. So
Well, there you go.
Here
Oh,
on
sorry.
college,
See?
that's not what's on the wall, but anyway, it's there in my heart.
Well, and he's a good guy because he's sitting here drinking a detour from Muskoka.
Right.
And what one are you sucking on over there?
I've got the creamy ale.
Oh, the creamy.
From Muskoka.
Muskoka, yeah. I'm on a detour as well.
You're on a
and
detour?
So we're promoting Muskoka today as one of our local Ontario brewers.
And the glasses have those great Muskoka chairs on them.
Yeah, they do too.
Do you
Yeah,
have the chairs?
Yeah, I got the chairs and I got a canoe on the other side.
You can get those for $90 at Costco. You know.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it's a good deal. You want a little one for your back?
What are you drinking over there, producer Ian?
Sprite.
All right.
There we go.
Cool and refreshing.
Like a good producer.
That's right. Very good. Very good. Well, Dave, welcome aboard. It's good to have you here. And we were chatting a little bit before and kind of joking because Dave said that you went to an Anglican seminary and were trying to be turned around by all the Anglicans. I ended up going back to church after a long hiatus from church when I came back in my late 20s when I met my wife Margie, fiance at the time, and we actually were brought back to church by a United Church minister. So there you go.
Everything
so we were
comes full
thrilled
circle.
about that. Yeah. So that's
You didn't
great.
stay, though.
I did not stay.
And-
No, I ended up back in the Anglican
And
church.
if I can just add, what was really cool about the story, maybe you could share it, is there's a connection. So you two didn't know each other before you came in here.
No, but the story is that the minister that was at the United Church, Sprucedale United Church in Chatham, was John Brown. And I said to Dave, it was John Brown, and Dave said...
John Brown was actually a student minister at my home congregation in St. Thomas, Ontario.
So there you go.
Knows my
Yeah.
parents very well. And actually, I didn't share with you that when I first started working in lay ministry within the church, doing youth ministry, I was in Kent Presbytery and
Yeah.
Chatham, Kent area there.
Oh, great.
and John was right in the heart of things there, and Sprucedale doing some incredible work. And
Yeah.
so
Well, that's
he was a
great.
great mentor early in ministry for me, too.
I feel like we should be drinking Sons of Kent today.
Yeah, I know. We kind of got off the mark,
I think they
didn't we?
have that.
Oh, they do have it
No,
here.
that's-
We promoted it the last podcast.
We did.
but,
Yeah.
You know,
No, that's good. I say we're all connected in some way when we get chatting with each other. So
well, we're all friends until
yeah,
it comes
yeah.
to sports.
That's right. And speaking of sports, this is the first time Kevin and I have been in this room with not one Leaf fan, but now 2.
Yeah. Producer Ian has a friend.
Yeah.
Woohoo. Let's go.
Let's go.
Dave, what have you done to be a Leafs fan? Like, what is this some sort of penance?
You know what? I didn't grow up a Leafs fan, but it was in high school when they all of a sudden turned it around, and I had a good buddy.
Did what? How old are you?
They should had they made it to. They had it not been for a bad call in Game 7 against.
My goodness,
the
we're
LA
still
Kings.
talking
Oh, was
about
that the Gretzky one from the net?
Carey
It would have
Fraser.
taken
Oh,
down-
there we
it
go.
would have been, at the very least, a great Stanley Cup final there.
If
between
only, right?
The Habs and the Leafs. That was a good run.
was a
But
good
that was exciting.
Well, if your grandmother was otherwise oriented, she would have been your grandfather, but that didn't happen either.
Yeah, what
Well,
was the other one? If Zans or Butts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas.
So since we actually did one of these, when the last time we talked about your sports teams, Rob, we were talking about the Red Wings on like a 1-9 skid.
Yeah.
And since then,
Not a good start. Well,
No.
they rattled off a whole bunch of wins, a lot of them in overtime.
yeah, incredible.
And I think they're game below 500, maybe
Yeah,
at
no,
500 right
what a
now. but
turnaround,
they've climbed the hill back up to that. So
Yeah.
we're
So
going
they're just
forward from
ruining
there.
their
So we're
draft
basically
position.
They're just ruining their draft
yeah,
position.
Yeah, well
and
done.
then, they're teasing us is basically what's going on.
And my Habs keep doing the same thing. It's just sort of like they're doing okay. They're doing far better than they should be doing. Shea Weber is coming back tonight, so I'm looking forward to that. We're recording on a Tuesday. Tonight's the night that he comes back. So
there you go.
So
Okay.
we'll look forward to that.
Very good. Very good.
And our Lions.
Well,
What are we to say?
the season's over basically.
Should
so
we enter
we're
into a
just-
moment of prayer?
Yeah, not even that.
Quick moment of
That's
silence.
powerful
We're
stuff,
talking
but
Detroit
you're talking about
Lions?
the
Detroit
Detroit
Lions.
Lions.
Okay, Eagles.
Yeah,
Eagles.
Eagles fan.
Oh, well.
Yeah, Eagles fan.
7 years in Philadelphia, wife from there, two
Oh.
kids born there.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Wife from there? Okay.
Yeah. So big year for you guys last year. Eh?
Yeah, and not so much this year. So
No,
we won't
okay.
talk about this year.
Yeah,
Last
yeah.
year, we'll dwell in that.
Well, last year, I mean, at least you've been to the promised land.
That's right.
Right? Yeah, that's good.
What's producer Ian got going on? What have you been up to?
Well, so I just spent the entirety of my morning and afternoon playing some sick jazz for
sick stuff.
for the feeder schools at my high school. So I went around to Ryerson Public School, St. George Public School, and what was the other? Pearson.
Wow.
Pearson Public School, and we played alongside the chamber orchestra. We played some jazz, and it was a lot of fun.
What were you playing?
I played tenor sax.
Tenor sax.
jazz.
You know
Yeah,
the
let's
ladies
go.
love the tenor
Oh,
sax.
yeah.
Can you
So
do
is
a
Ian.
careless
Good
whisper?
choice.
Can you do that? We could maybe break for that right now.
What were a couple of the tunes today?
We did sort of a mashup of the holiday season and Happy Holidays.
Ooh,
Yeah,
nice.
that was
Happy
fun.
holiday.
The exact one.
That's the one.
I had a solo in that one. We also played Take the A Train, and what's the other one? It's on the
don't
tip
know,
of my
man.
tongue.
Well,
We played Birdland fourth, and then
it'll come to you later.
Here, There, and Everywhere.
Oh,
That
here,
one.
there, and everywhere. Man, he's a
Yeah.
regular Clarence Carter.
Well, Ian's a talented musician. Talented musician.
The other question I have is, this time of year ramping up for all of us. What's happening at our communities, at our churches, Rob? What's been on?
Well, we're heading into Advent, of course. This Sunday is the first Sunday Advent, so we're getting ready for that season. With this Sunday, we're having a parish potluck and a special program before, which we call Messy Church, which I think a lot of
Now,
churches
listen.
kind of.
Since the change in legislation, does potluck mean something different at your place now?
No,
or-
no, 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 no. No, it was not illegal before.
Okay.
And we're okay now.
Okay, all right.
But no, we're going to be doing this program for some of our families and youth, but we're also have an opportunity to invite some of the families and youth from the area in South London to come and visit us as well.
Nice.
And we're cooking turkeys for them and going to have a nice meal and afterwards, after the program. So that's good, and we're gearing up for something that the parish has been doing for the last few years, where we actually get a Christmas bus, and we fill the bus up and string lights and everything, and bring in our Dave McEwen, our great musician,
Incredible
to sing
guy.
some songs as we go around, and we go to certain parts of the city and see the lights, and we end up in Victoria Park and that sort of stuff. So so good fun through Advent and gearing up for Christmas.
What's happening at Riverside United?
Most notably, probably not to live in the past, but this past Saturday night we did a fun event. It was a sing-along Sound of Music showing.
wow.
And so we gathered together and
The hills were alive.
They
Yeah,
were
were
alive
they?
indeed. Yes. It was hysterical actually. Yeah.
Mark involved with that. Mark Smith,
was
you're
not
incredible.
there, actually.
Are you
No,
kidding? I
no,
thought it was
no.
going to be a story of Mark Smith because you have an incredible music director over there.
Yeah, we can give him a hard time on the podcast.
Yeah, we
here.
can. Yeah.
That's right. That's
But
right.
no, we'll probably do that again next year, and we'll probably dress up next year. To
Oh,
really,
nice, nice.
Get in great costumes.
Yeah.
Great outfits and
Fantastic.
Good for you. Good for you. Kevin, what's going on at St. Aidan?
Well, we like you, we're getting geared up now for Advent, and for us, most this time of year, not so much the social events, although we do have a couple things. Last year, producer Ian here jumped in with us, and we're going to do this again this year, and we went around. We haven't scheduled what day yet, but we went and did some caroling around the city. We're actually in front of a Starbucks, and in front of Canadian Tire, and in front of Remarks.
Freezing our fingers and toes off. But
Yep,
it was a lot of fun.
Yep, guitar didn't like it after a while, but we'll be bringing something like that up very soon as well. But right now, a lot of our planning is around worship and liturgy. So we have a really cool thing happening on Sunday where our Advent wreath is something everybody makes. So they bring in some greenery from their own yard, and everybody participates, and they all
nice.
come up at the front. We begin outside the church and process into a piece of music, Prepare the Way of the Lord, and we all lay our greeneries on the wreath and make the Advent wreath to begin the season. So it's a fun time. We do a little bit of work around Hildegard of Bingen and her theology of Veritatis, which is the greening power of God. So what we try and do is add a little bit of greenery each week as we get closer to the Christmas season. And then through preaching and music, try and highlight the fact that we're moving closer to the light and further away from the darkness. So yeah, that's what we got going on.
Good.
Just a little bit of stuff.
No, that's great. Yeah, well, we're all busy, and there's lots of things going on. It's a special time of year for so many, so it's nice to look forward to this time of year through Advent and into Christmas. So, Dave, since you're here, and I haven't had a chance to talk to many United Church ministers for a while, I got to ask you about somebody.
Okay.
Okay, is that all right? Can we do that?
He knows
About
who's coming.
Jesus.
You know,
It's about
yeah,
Jesus.
It's about Jesus. We'll get to Jesus in a minute. But no, I think but the talk about this goes far beyond the walls of our parishes and our church life. So Greta Vosper, and I'm sure you've probably been asked questions about this a million times. So, but for our listeners, those that are listening to us now that might not know, Greta Vosper was ordained in 1993, and she served as minister of West Hill United Church in Toronto since about 97. And she's been really upfront about her atheism, her non-belief in the Bible for years. And it should be noted most of her current congregants are supportive of her views, but there are some that have been critical and some that have left, of course, and because they're at fundamental odds with what she's saying. There was a hearing by the church's governing body, but a settlement was reached a couple of weeks ago, and that's really what kind of caught the news, I think. And that settlement said basically that she was allowed to continue her ministry where she is. So with that said, just your thoughts about how you feel about Greta and her position, and how's that even affecting you?
Yeah, good place to start. An interesting one. Oddly enough, and I had not anticipated, or I was anticipating having this conversation this evening, but had a parishioner approach me this morning. We had a lengthy conversation about the struggles that this person was having with how do I resolve remaining, in this denomination that has allowed for someone, namely Greta, to remain a minister while being an atheist and being strongly opposed to a lot of the doctrine of our church. I should state just a couple of things because not everybody realizes this. So this wasn't a national decision by our denominational body.
Right.
Our structure is such where it was Toronto Conference. We're in the midst of restructuring, which we're in a position of weakness when it comes to dealing with things like this right now. We're moving from 4 courts of the church to 3, and I think that perhaps has factored into things here. But I should first start by saying that Greta is one person, and while she believes that there are a large number of clergy and lay people within our denomination that agree with her and the way in which she speaks of God, the vast majority of people within my denomination, clergy included among them, are not in line with where she is as it
Right,
relates to belief and the gospel and what a minister is called to do and what faith communities should be doing. But I should also state that it's very easy on the outside, particularly for those who are outside of our tradition, to look and to cast judgment and say, how could you allow for that to happen? And a few things to say to that. I think that my tradition isn't the only mainline tradition where there are fringe parts of our tradition that are a little unsavory. Look at other denominations where, perhaps in the Anglican stream, how do you resolve, parts of the tradition that are anti-LGBT?
Right.
And it's a complex thing, I think, to be a member of a denominational body. It'd be very easy to be just a one-off community of faith, but to be a member of a denomination requires that one embrace, nuance and different beliefs and that sort of thing. In this case here, I think that what it really comes down to is that it became a legal battle. And if you look at any of the headlines and even her own blog posts about the ruling that came down recently, because she was brought under review, and it all started from her obviously, being upfront about her beliefs, and it wasn't originally that she said that I'm an atheist, but eventually grew into that space where she defined where she is right now as far as belief system goes, is that she's a non-believer, doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in a higher power, and eventually the Toronto Conference folk decided where it normally would be just at ordination, at the time of ordination, where someone would be tasked with answering questions about what they believe. They decided that they were going to go through this process of testing it, which is unusual. And through that, she consulted with and created a legal battle and brought in a pretty sizable legal team to fight this battle. And I think that where some would look at it and say that this was a ruling based on theology, faith, really it's more of a ruling that has come down as a result of recognizing that, the legality, how do you, it's so complex.
Right.
And it would be
Yeah.
very
There's
easy
many
for us to
layers.
say,
Yeah.
it comes down to a weak, united church. That's, we get painted with that broad stroke that we're wishy-washy when it comes to our theology, our faith tradition, but no, actually, what this has enabled us to do actually is to see how strong people are in their convictions, and I'm amazed at the number of young clergy members within our denomination that have stood up to say that's not what I believe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I saw an interesting piece. Maybe it was the Vancouver Sun, where I think the dean of VST,
Jason Biasi.
yes, wrote about the students that he's teaching out there. To your point, and about how they are quite articulate about their faith in Jesus Christ and their own sorts of evangelism, and that for them, I think his approach was the best response is to ignore it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's what I really, and I don't know Greta.
Yeah.
I have a good friend and colleague who grew up in that congregation and has stated, man, I don't know how it is now, but and you wouldn't call it this, but boy, could she preach.
Yeah.
And some connections that way. But what I see is a person that's really desperate to perhaps use the church as a means to arrive at a place where you can put something on your book title, defrocked by the United Church of Canada, deemed a heretic.
Right.
And in some ways, I think that part of the ruling had to do with not wanting to empower that and not really wanting to weaken that position. I will say that she comes from a very declining congregation, and a congregation that, as far as I know, they don't have any youth or young adults or children, which says a lot. Right. And but the thing that troubles me the most, I think, about it is that, we have to ask ourselves the question, the shape of our congregations, is it shaped by us?
Right.
Or is it shaped by something else? Now,
Right.
the way in which we talk about God and,
Right.
and talk about the nature of Jesus,
Yep.
Our Trinitarian beliefs, there's room there for deep discussion. We all know that.
Yep.
But I think when a person kind of forms a community, in this case, you can't really call it a community of faith, but a community,
yeah.
of people that just are there. How could anybody follow?
They're her
and
followers.
follow?
Yeah, no,
They're
you-
her followers.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're not,
exactly. Yeah.
and in the context of, I think, what most of us, even in very sort of liberal progressive realities, would say are followers of Jesus,
Yeah.
in the communities that we pastor or we belong to. I think that, as I've watched it, I don't know her, so I don't mean to cast judgment, but what I see is, I see somebody who's very ambitious to sort of carve out her own legacy.
Yeah.
And it's sort of sad because, on one hand, she doesn't like the language of the church, but on the other hand, when the church decided it needed to have a conversation about this, she's the one who came up with the words heresy trial.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So it's to me, it's just sad that I agree with you that I think that in some ways the church has been used is the right word for it, and I think that's just unfortunate.
Well, and the ability to say, I know that years ago they started to, Easter Sunday became not a Sunday to proclaim the resurrection, but to sing things like, changing words to, traditional hymns like Jesus Christ is risen today,
Yeah.
got changed to glorious hope is risen today. Yeah. And I really take issue with the idea that when we sing Jesus Christ is risen today, that we're not able to embrace nuance, that every Christian sings that song the same way, right?
Yeah, well, of
believing
course
the
they don't.
exact same
Yeah,
thing.
they don't,
don't.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a gift to be. I think that one of the more powerful gifts of being a part of a community of faith is the idea of coming together with people who think differently.
Right.
And most people outside the church may look at inside the church and say, "Oh, it's just all sheep who believe the same
Yeah.
thing," but they don't recognize that
Well,
there's
no, not at all.
quite a
It's-
variety of beliefs, and what a wonderful thing to embrace that. But to shift toward a community of believers or non-believers that are of one mind on things, well, you'll find that on either side of the theological spectrum.
Absolutely, you will.
And the most powerful thing about being in communities of faith I've found is that they offer that opportunity of transformation in ways that you don't get anywhere else.
Right.
So, and that transformation is a powerful thing to people. And just, I'm sure you guys have had the experience of after preaching a sermon, somebody saying, I never thought of it like that, or I never saw that scripture like that. That's transformative.
Right.
And to Dave's point, like you said, it offers up, this Greta stuff offers up an opportunity to have those conversations with people and go to places that maybe they weren't able to go to before. Like that opens the door to that for us as pastors and creates an opportunity for that transformation,
Right.
which I think is so paramount in a faith community.
It's similar to what I've said about a lot of the stuff that you talk about people in different traditions, right? Like a lot of people have a hard time with John Shelby Spong, right? Who's an Anglican bishop. But what John Shelby Spong has offered to us is those conversations, right? So it's open up for us. I mean, I have colleagues who just simply cry heresy every time you bring his name up, right? Heretic. Maybe they're right. I don't know. I'm not gonna cast aspersions on the man. But what I will say is his writings have sort of stimulated conversation, as you're talking about. It's like the parishioner who comes to you today, the congregant, and says, I need to talk about this. That is opening up for us a door that perhaps otherwise might be shut because nobody wants to say what they think, right? True. On both sides of how they feel about her or what she's doing or about what the church is doing or not doing.
And oftentimes people won't come right out and say, I want to talk to you about God.
Yeah.
But they'll come to you and talk and say, tell me about that, what do you think about that minister that says they don't believe in God?
Yeah.
Well, that's the opportunity of opening that door
Yeah.
to say, well, tell me about
And asking
God with
questions
you.
like, is that ministry?
Right, exactly.
Or is that the church? Well, what is the church?
What is exactly?
It forces us to really think about who we are, what we
Yeah.
believe,
Yeah.
and I really think that the other issue I have too is that I think there's this idea of there's this common comment that you'll hear from a lot of individuals, and that is that ministers, in seminary they study things, but they're afraid to share those things from the pulpit
Right, yeah.
and this and that. I don't see any of that really
No.
in our world, and yet that's what Greta will say is that this is everybody believes what I believe, or there's a far larger group, but they're just afraid
Afraid to say it.
I mean, there's a lot of bravery within our church, and I don't think there's many Sundays where I don't step up into the pulpit or in front of folk and say, "Yeah, here's something that I struggle with too." I mean, this passage of scripture, man,
That's
this is
right,
a tough one here.
Yep.
I don't know what to do with this.
Yep.
And our job is not to just simply redeem it and
Yeah.
wash our hands at the end of it and say, "Great,"
Yep.
but to embrace the complexity of it and to acknowledge. The dark parts of our past.
Right. Some of it is irredeemable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to be able to say that out loud
Yeah.
is a gift. And I honestly, I've been at this for over 20 years. I've found myself at times having to say things that probably before seminary I would have never said. But, and is there somebody who maybe gets ruffled up a little bit over that? Well, yeah, probably. But then there's a whole bunch of others who are going, oh, thank God somebody finally said something about that,
Yeah,
because, and that's the thing is I think that what I'm hopeful for out of issues like this, like as we talk about the issues of United Church and Greta Vosper, is just one example of many, really. But those are opportunities for us to engage a broader conversation about what we really believe about our communities, about the gospel, about what ministry is, what are faith communities, how do we live and how do we behave, and what are we doing to engage in the community around us, or as we like to talk about, the public square.
Right.
And so to that end, with your permission, I'll shift gears today.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah,
And so
'cause we're going to get into that.
it was a pretty exciting time because just a couple of weeks ago, Angus Regis released a study called Faith in the Public Square, a comprehensive study of the segments of Canadian society.
They must have been listening to our podcast.
They had to have been listening to the Vicar's Crossing.
Of course they were. Of course.
Faith and the public
come up
square.
with faith and the public
It's like, finally, somebody's listening, And, basically the findings, which are surprising to some, are that proponents of religious faith in public life in Canada tend to be younger, more highly educated, and more likely to have voted Liberal or Progressive. So let me invite you guys to start with you, Dave. You had a chance to read the study and read the articles about it. What sort of response? Is it surprising to you? Are there things in it that sort of make sense? Or
I think the most jarring thing for me was sort of the opinions that were expressed about differing faith traditions, and certainly as we think about, as somebody who lived in the United States for 7 years and consistently hear from folk about the rise of Trump and,
and
some
the
of the
religious
fear that's
right
around that,
Yeah.
To see the statistics related to opinions around Islam,
Right.
It was troubling. But for me, it's reflective of the reality that here in Canada, we're not without our dark parts,
Right.
where people are living in fear, and I think there was some percentage of like 48% see the rise of Islam as being these are not the correct words, but detrimental, but doing more harm.
Yes, I do.
Now, fortunately, there's the majority of Canadians who don't believe that,
Right.
And that number has probably changed and gone down recently, and hopefully will continue to go down there. But that was one of the things that kind of jumped out at me.
Right.
But it's interesting to look at it, and not a lot surprised me,
Right.
in going through those things. But some of the overall findings, I'm sure some people would be incredibly surprised by. So,
Right.
yeah.
Now, specifically, Dave, your church has really made an incredible effort. We live in a neighborhood, so we tend to ride by. Sure. We get the posters and we get to drive by the signs and to see the things that you're doing over there. But you've been really intentional as a community, I believe, in terms of engaging conversation about really hot button issues in our society and in our culture, and in terms of those important sort of earmarks of where culture is changing and how we're moving. I wonder if you might be able to share a little bit about some of those things. I know you just had an incredible series on sort of transgender, LGBTQ, and all that stuff. But I just think you've invited people into your community, which has been impressive in terms of how you might have been able to get a response. And I wonder how your congregation responded to that, what sort of participation you got, and sort of what comes from that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a process in the United Church of Canada that churches can go through to become an affirming community of faith. You would assume that with the United Church leading the way, back in 1988, not standing in the way.
30 years ago now.
Yeah. Gay and men, lesbian and gay men, not standing in the way of their ordination within the church. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have the assumption that all of our churches are affirming, but the whole process is designed to get people thinking about sexuality, gender identity, all the issues around that, in order that we might educate ourselves. And so before I arrived at Riverside, they'd already started that work of going through the Affirm process. And it was a little over a year ago that we voted in favor of becoming an affirming community of faith. As a part of that, there's a great intention to trying to welcome as best one can, as best a community can, those that identify as LGBTQ. And it's not an easy thing. It's a journey that you begin at that time. That isn't just about putting the decals on the door, but it's more than that. And so, each year we walk in the London Pride Parade.
Yes.
Which you talk about the public square. It's a real interesting thing where when you're walking with a banner that says church.
Yes.
And I'm there with my, clergy shirt on, underneath my Riverside colored shirt, to see people there participating in the parade and weeping on the sideline and saying thank you, mouthing those words. You recognize just how. You would assume that folks recognize that the church is a place, that progressive churches for a long period of time have been changing their opinions on that, but not everybody realizes that, and particularly those who have grown up in a tradition where they've been told that there's something wrong with you,
right? You're disordered.
And that you're going to hell as a result of that.
I'll be pouring the beverages there, by the way.
Yeah, good. I'll be there too.
It's going to be hot.
Yeah. So that's where I think that it's really an important thing, because we take for granted sometimes. We think people know who we are, but we have to start to be out in the public and not behind closed doors.
And we have to be the ones saying it, because people, like you say, people do have an understanding, and it's oftentimes a misunderstanding of who we are and what we represent. I remember a story of when I was in Windsor, my son started high school, was in grade 9, and somebody said to him in his first year, "What's your dad do?" And he said, "My dad's a priest or a minister." And the first thing out of the young man's mouth was, "Oh, then you don't like gay people."
Yeah.
That was the first thing that came out of his mouth. So that whole
Yes,
understanding of who he was as a 14-year-old kid, who his family
colored
was
by his idea of church.
Exactly, and we see that in a lot of different avenues. So to actually be out there saying, "No, this is who we are," is incredibly powerful and again transformative, isn't it?
Those opportunities, right? Like the Gay Pride Parade is a very good example, and I mean, I think seeing. The last couple or 3 years, anyway, I know that we've had a presence there, the diocese. And it just, when I think back even 10 years ago, that seemed unconscionable, right? Like we just weren't doing that sort of thing. And I think the more we have opportunity to sort of step out into the public square, a little over a year ago it was, a shooting in Saint Foy, Quebec in a mosque.
Right. Yeah.
And we gathered on the steps of the mosque here in London the next morning. And over 700 people from London came out, and there were all kinds of church denominations represented, but also people from a variety of faiths that were represented on those steps that day. And the people with their broken hearts who were there were heartened to see the churches and the faith communities making a statement about something which was shattered our own image of who we are as Canadians. And so that idea of sort of faith in the public square, I mean, I think it highlights when that many people come out to something that a church group organized to say, yeah, we want to respond to that, is a statement about what's in here. I mean, a surprising thing to me in a way was not, some of it was not that surprising, but I mean, I guess that the thing that strikes me is I think our perception is that the people who are religious, particularly as it relates to Christianity anyway, in the church, we see them as old, right? They're old, they're conservative, they tend to be that way. What this particular study pointed out, and we're going to post the link to this on our pod page as well, podcast, so that producer Ian's got that under control, so you can read the results of the study yourself. But what it points out is that folks who are university educated, who are younger, even if they're not religious, see the value of religion in a society as a whole. Right. So there seems to be a recognition that even though I might not go to church, or I might not go to prayers at the mosque, or I might not go to synagogue, I somehow I know in my heart that the contributions made, say, to even science, contributions made to hospital care and to education. I just was talking to one of our former refugee coordinators in the diocese yesterday, chatting online to get some numbers in preparation for this, Elizabeth Walton, and she told me that last year alone there were 5,200 churches in this country involved in resettling people to Canada, 800 of them Anglican. So when you consider that, I think those who are educated, they know that, right? So they know that these new Canadians or these newcomers to Canada are not just landing here. They're landing here with a support team. Mm-hmm. And those folks are the people from the religious communities. I'd love to know what Ian thinks of this, producer Ian, because Ian is 17. Yeah, you're 17?
Yeah.
Yeah, and soon to be 18, I think.
Yeah, in March.
In March. So he's coasting towards voting age. But if these folks were calling you up, if the Angus Reid people were phoning you up and saying, and their first question was, Ian, are you religious? What would you say?
I'd say no.
Right, okay. Yeah. So then if their next question was, okay, you're not religious, do you go to church?
Well, yeah.
How often do you go to church?
I go to church for Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter. Twice on Christmas, I think.
Maybe twice. Is this in the contract?
Yeah, because my mom's like, do this. Yeah.
It's in the mom contract. Yeah. These are the days you'll go to church, right? Yeah. Okay, so good. I mean, I'm really appreciating this. So Ian is not religious, but he goes to church a few times a year. It's a part of his family, right? Yeah. And then if the next question that these pollsters ask you is, would you say that religion in general, or religious communities, play a positive role in the community? What would your answer be to that?
I'd say absolutely. So part of my last year, so in my grade 11 year, I took a course called World Religions, and we discussed like all of the sort of major ones. We discussed Islam, Christianity, Buddhism,
yeah, Hinduism,
Hinduism, yeah. Judaism, all the other isms and
all the isms.
We're all isms. Anglicanism, Unitedism.
And one of the things I think myself and my class came to the conclusion is that religion, albeit has faults, I mean a lot of things do, but it has a positive impact because it provides not only identity to some individuals, but also a community for those individuals to be a part of. Mm-hmm. Sort of one of the things that I had a thought of was imagine a widowed elderly woman whose kids moved off. Like, where is she going to get her interaction with other humans? Like, mm-hmm. Sure, she could go to like the store, but being a part of religion for her would be her sense of community. Like right. Mine for me, like, may not be going to the church, but I like feel emotions when I'm like playing in a jazz band, for example. Right. So obviously these are appropriate emotions, but
I'm sure you do, especially when those ladies are looking you in the eyes. Play me another tune.
I mean, I wouldn't really say that because I was performing to some grade like
okay,
dues,
yeah.
So
well, fair enough. Maybe, but like when you're performing on the stage at a big night, okay,
different night, but
okay, yeah.
It provides sort of value for its different individuals, and I was kind of shocked when they said a lot of public faith proponents were more likely to be younger and like university educated and things like that. Right. I was shocked about that because I know in my school the amount of people who say that they go to church openly are I could count on one hand.
Right. So it's pretty. You would see. I mean, you'd fit in the category of people. Like, I mean, they're not. There's not a ton of people going to church every week.
Yeah, there's not. But I think one of the things that maybe I don't know because I haven't read all of it, but I think a part of it would be not specifically like church, but also to like mosques or other type of religious environments and areas. Because I know specifically at Central, the school that I go to, the ratio of like Christians or like that sort of religion background to like Muslims or Islam is very almost 1-to-1.
Yeah,
so going to so for people maybe going to like an environment like that is not specifically just to like a church, but to a different like
Right.
So you definitely fall into the categories of these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What this Angus Reid poll put out for us. So, it's
So I'll let them know they can call you next time because you fit
That's
right
right.
in.
yeah, I'm a
category.
prime testing subject. Yeah.
But see, what I find interesting about Ian, and Ian is not the only one, is Ian is finding a way to participate in religious community, even though he doesn't classify himself as religious. And the community which he's participating in is also finding ways to include him, even though he doesn't like to go to church on Sunday. Right? Because there are many ways to engage with this young man outside of a Sunday morning church service, and this is one of the ways that we do that. He is here taking part in this. He's come out and played at our concerts. You know, I mean, we're going out, and when we talk about that faith in the public square and going to caroling in front of very public places, Ian's the dude out in the front, right? So
It's important to make connections, and obviously being defined by something and only that specific something is bad for anyone. Like if you're only defined by being a sports fan, or if you're only defined by being whatever, having one defining factor is not that great, but including yourself in everything is not only fun, like producing this, fantastic, time of my life. But like going caroling and things like that, that's also another way of me sort of getting out there and having a blast.
Right, and that's it. And it's about, like Evan said, finding those ways to engage that. And as Dave and at Riverside you've done, to engage that group. And it's not about, you know, if they come and have this, take part in this forum we're doing, that maybe they'll join the church. That's not the avenue you go down. It's to engage because there's a need there, and we're called to engage our communities and not be, and not live as those insular communities, only take care of what we need to engage in.
Right. And I'm meeting more and more people as I'm out and about. You may not be surprised to hear this. I get around, but I like to socialize. You know, when I meet with people at various places around town, there's a group of people, and Rob and I were talking about this just yesterday. You know, there's a group of about 20 people on the top of my mind who don't go to church. They don't have a church, but I'm their pastor. And you know about this, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
And so if there's something going on in their life, I'm the person they'll text or call or email or Facebook message or tweet or whatever else to say, can we get together because I'm struggling right now. And that's a very different model of church. I mean, we've been locked into believing these things about, you know, single pastor, single building, everybody comes to the church. But what do we do about getting the church out there? Dave, what do you got to say about that?
Yeah, a transformative thing for me a number of years ago, a fairly recent book called The New Parish. Some evangelical leaders in the U.S. that were exploring this idea of moving beyond the walls of the church. And typically, I think in some church traditions, it's all about, you know, bringing everybody into your church and
attraction.
How do we approach things in a different way. And I had a laugh there. I was at the church, just a week or so ago, and round of the bend as I'm downstairs for a meeting, and there are a bunch of high school girls that were there for a guides gathering, and one of the girls, hey, this is my soccer coach, everybody, and another one saying, no, that's my soccer coach, and then another one saying, no, that's my neighbor, and so right. Like recognizing, I think that the key thing is to be visible, and I think that there was this I don't know whether it was just in the United Church, but I think a lot of like older colleagues in my tradition were very timid and are very timid.
Reserved.
And, don't want to tell people because you think about some of the parts of our past
Yes.
are pretty shameful, and you
Yes,
don't want to
correct.
be painted with that broad stroke. And I've kind of committed to this idea of tell people who you are as a way of helping people to see beyond those stereotypes.
Right.
And it is amazing, that you go to backyard parties in the neighborhood and minister, and suddenly you're engaged.
And you're
in this-
drinking Detour.
That's right,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
Are you
So
allowed to drink that?
always surprising.
Do
to
you
people.
always wear jeans? I didn't think you guys were allowed to wear
that one
jeans.
once. Yeah, I've never seen a clergyman in jeans.
Well,
here we go.
well, you should just be thankful he's wearing them.
But that is something that I think we have to approach it from that standpoint of saying that, the church was never intended to be a place that one goes, but is intended to be
A way of living.
Exactly.
Feeling.
Yeah. I mean, the way in which we, worship. Yeah. What is prayer? What is that? I mean, is that something that I would hate to be in an environment where we look at prayer from such a narrow standpoint that it's just bowing your head in a worship space, for a few minutes on a Sunday morning. It's got to be more than that. And in particular, when we think about things happening within the world, shootings, violence, and the racial things that we see.
Sure.
In the U.S. along the border. I mean, people are waiting for us to take a stance on that, and our faith is there guiding us in our thinking as it relates to that. And so, the more we can let that spill out into our everyday lives and continue to not compartmentalize the work that we do, but to view it from the standpoint of saying that everywhere I go, I'm not going to be ashamed of who I am, what I'm a part of, and tell people about that, provided that it's not done in the way it's been done in the past,
this
where it's-
proselytizing sort of browbeating. Rob and I were talking yesterday about how many times we get a call from a funeral director that says, now, would you come to the funeral home and do this funeral? The family is not very religious.
Not religious, yeah.
And then I show up and I do a funeral in the basic form of an Anglican service, and when you're done, they say, that's perfect. It wasn't too religious. and I say, well, because the notion of who we are, and the notion of, and what they're really saying is we don't want to be browbeaten. We don't want to be told we're all going to hell. We don't want to be told these sort of things. And they think that's who we are. Lillian Daniel has a great book called, she's great. And she has this book called Tired of Apologizing for a Church I Don't Belong to.
Right.
And in it, she talks about this very thing that we're talking about. Like, people have this notion of who we are. And she talks about getting on a plane and having that conversation that we've all had, that awkward conversation. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm a priest or I'm a minister. Oh, well, maybe I should be careful what I say. Or you get, I need to confess every sin I've ever had to you, and so on and so forth. But she says that what was interesting was she had a confirmation class in her United Methodist Church. United Methodist, right? I think,
No, UCC.
No, UCC, right? United Church of
Connected
Christ.
to
Sorry.
us.
Yes, that's right. She's connected with you guys. Anyway, she had this confirmation class, and they had this project to do. And once they got doing the project, most of them felt they didn't want to get confirmed anymore. And so they came back to her and they said, well, we don't think we need to be confirmed. And she said, what is that all about? And they said, well, we can't confirm to be a part of what the church says. And then she said, well, what does the church say? And these were like 15-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And so they started talking about the anti-gay attitudes and about, sort of some of the colonialism that the church has heaped upon our First Nations brothers and sisters, and so on and so on. And then she said, whoa, hold on a second. I've known you most of your life in this church. She was just outside of Chicago at the time, and in Glen Ellen. And she said, I've known you since you were like 4 years old. Where did you learn that the church is it doesn't welcome gays? And she said, I don't know. One of the kids would say, I don't know. Yeah. Where did you learn that we don't care about First Nations people and we're not trying to make some restoration for those things? I don't know. I just know it. Well, how they just know it is the culture is infused with this idea that we're something, and they hear it, but they didn't hear it at their church.
Right.
But they bought into that same notion. So we have to stop apologizing for a church we don't belong to, folks. I mean, we do a lot of good things.
There was a study done in the United States a number of years ago, a few years back, but recent enough that it applies, I think, where they asked just individuals, average individuals. In particular, I think they were approaching millennials and asking them questions about their perception of the church. And they came up with, if I get it right, 3 things that they would define the church as: people that connected to the Christian church, that they are hypocritical.
Yeah, that was another big one in there too.
Yeah. What was it? Anti-LGBT was another one.
Yeah.
And there was a third one. I can't remember what that was, but
They smell bad.
Hey, speak for yourself.
but those are things that really, when you think about it, I mean,
We've been told.
they really hurt. But I think that it rings true when you listen and tune into a certain stream of our tradition.
Yes.
And so how do we work to undo that?
How do we counteract that?
Right.
Yeah, which is what I'm seeing, and the way in which you do that is one person at a time.
Well, and this is one of the ways that we do that. And I understand too, like we just learned today that this is a fellow podcaster. You've got a podcast that's happening too. So
Yeah, give us a plug.
Tell
Give
folks
us a
about
plug.
that.
Illuminate Faith. We've been on hiatus for a little bit, but you can go back into the archives and listen to some good episodes on preaching. And we did an episode with John Bell on humor in the Bible a while back. But yeah, another few other United Church clergy persons. Doug Peck, Isaac Mundy, who's since moved away out to the Belleville area there. But it's a great. It's a great.
Where
thing
can
to
we
do.
find you?
So Illuminate Faith, go on iTunes, wherever you can
SoundCloud.
find SoundCloud. All of those places.
All right,
So
perfect.
Illuminate with an 8 in there.
With an 8. Ooh,
Illuminate.
fancy. Yeah.
Illuminate.
Fancy.
Yes,
The 8
because
ball
no
is
one
right
would
in
take
there.
that, right?
That's right. Well, this has been great conversation.
Absolutely. We could go all
I'm
day on
feeling we
this.
could do a 2.0 here
Yeah.
and bring Dave back sometime and
Absolutely.
continue. 'Cause
Yeah.
there's lots to
Yeah,
talk
you're welcome
about,
at our
so-
podcast anytime, Dave.
That's right. So thanks
Glad
for
to be
coming
here.
in.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
and
inviting
all the
me.
best to you and everybody at Riverside, and we'll look forward to getting back together again.
Very good.
All
Thanks.
right. So once again, this wraps up another edition of the Vickers Crossing here at Crossings on Hyde Park Road in London. For producer Ian, for Revy Kevy, for Dave, and I'm Rob Henderson. Thanks for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you next time and chatting again. And remember to always look both ways.
Before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Catherine Olenek. If you have any questions or want to know how to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, please look in the description to find out more. Thanks!